Imagine waking up today, right, to find that the price of the energy powering your city just uh, plummeted by 14% overnight.
Yeah, that is a massive drop.
Exactly. And imagine finding out that the national parliament that, governs your daily life is suddenly scrambling to add over 270 new chairs to its chambers.
Which is just a logistical nightmare to even picture.
Right.
Yeah.
And then imagine learning that a machine sitting on the coast of Tamil Nadu just started literally creating its own nuclear fuel, like out of thin air.
It sounds like science fiction, honestly.
It really does.
Yeah.
Usually when you look at a map of the world or you look at the structure of a government, there's this comforting illusion of permanence.
Oh, for sure.
You just assume the borders are fixed, the laws are settled, the foundations are poured in concrete. You point at it and say, well, that is how things are.
Right, because we rely on that stability, don't we? We need that predictable framework just to navigate our daily lives, to make financial decisions or just to understand our place in the world. But the reality is that the framework is rarely as solid as it appears from the outside.
And today is one of those days that proves it perfectly. It is Thursday, April 9th, 2026. And if you look closely at the news today, the concrete of our world is wet again.
Yeah, it really is.
We're looking at a world,
Yeah.
and specifically a nation, right in the middle of a massive fundamental transition. Everywhere you look, the rules are being rewritten.
I mean, it is the absolute definition of a paradigm shift. We are seeing tectonic plates moving across geopolitics, across energy technology, across the fundamental math of our democratic institutions.
Even philosophy, right?
Exactly, even deep within our philosophical understanding of faith and law.
So that is our mission for today's deep dive. We have this eclectic stack of 11 distinct source materials in front of us, and we're going to weave them together to reveal this really fascinating snapshot of a society in motion.
There's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. We're going to start with a sudden geopolitical shockwave in the Middle East that is completely upending global markets and, putting money directly back into your wallet.
Which everyone loves to hear.
Right. Then we will pivot to India's mind-bending technological answer to the energy crisis. From there, we are going to unpack a monumental physical expansion of the Indian parliament.
That's the 270 chairs you mentioned.
Exactly. Then we'll plunge into the messy, chaotic reality of today's state elections, explore a profound philosophical battle happening right now at the Supreme Court, and finally, we will catch our breath with an absolute nail-biter of a cricket match.
It is a massive landscape, but the connections between these seemingly disparate events, the way global diplomacy bleeds into local energy policy or the way infrastructure dictates politics, that is what makes today's material so incredibly interesting to unpack.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the geopolitical earthquake.
Yeah.
The United States and Iran have just agreed to a 2-week ceasefire.
Which no one saw coming this fast.
Right. The whiplash here is just incredible. I mean, we're talking about the Trump administration shifting from threats of all-out destruction to rapid-fire diplomacy practically overnight.
Yeah.
A U.S. delegation is heading to Pakistan for talks this Saturday. And look at the roster. Vice President J.D. Vance is leading the team, accompanied by senior advisors Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff.
The speed of this pivot is what is truly staggering here.
Yeah.
We're watching a real-time transition from, battlefield dynamics straight to negotiated outcomes.
It's dizzying.
It is. The White House indicated that this shift comes after a revised Iranian proposal that aligns more closely with U.S. demands, so they feel they have a workable framework.
Quote.
But what is fascinating here, and what speaks volumes about the mechanics of international relations, is the venue. They are meeting in Islamabad, Pakistan.
Right. Why Pakistan? Of all the places in the world to hold a summit of this magnitude, why go there?
Well, because in the world of high-stakes diplomacy, the geometry of the meeting table matters just as much as the conversation itself.
That makes sense.
Pakistan serves as a highly specific, mutually acceptable neutral ground. You have to understand the historical mechanism at play here.
Which is what?
Pakistan has maintained these complex, often simultaneous diplomatic back channels with both Washington and Tehran for decades. So it's a venue that both sides can stomach without appearing to concede home field advantage to the other.
Okay. So it's about optics as much as logistics.
Exactly. It signals a pragmatic compromise before the talks even begin. But if we connect this localized diplomatic relief valve to the wider region, it has caused an absolute explosion of backlash in Israel.
Well, the reactions are furious. You read these sources, and the Israeli opposition is not mincing words at all. It feels like a genuine domestic crisis for them.
It is a profound strategic crisis from their perspective, yeah. Yair Lapid, the main opposition leader, is calling this an unprecedented political disaster.
Wow, those are strong words.
They are. He is arguing that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has completely failed to achieve his stated goals. You know, goals like neutralizing Iran's nuclear program or curbing its regional influence.
Right.
And the core of Lapid's frustration is structural. He's pointing out that the Israeli government wasn't even at the decision-making table for a matter that is entirely central to their own national security.
It's not just Lapid, though, is it?
No, not at all. Former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett is slamming the leadership for selling what he calls illusions.
Illusions about safety.
Exactly. He's pointing out that the network of proxy forces, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Iranian regime itself, are all still standing.
Yeah, the threats haven't actually vanished.
Right. And Yair Golan, who heads the left-wing Democrats Party, he labeled this a strategic failure. He noted a very specific detail that highlights the messiness of this ceasefire.
What's the detail?
The truce entirely excludes Lebanon. Israeli forces are still actively fighting Hezbollah there.
Oh, wow. So it's a ceasefire, but only selectively.
Exactly. Even Avigdor Lieberman is warning that if this deal doesn't force Iran to fundamentally renounce the destruction of Israel and, end its uranium enrichment, it just allows them to pause, resupply, and regroup for a much worse conflict later.
Which perfectly highlights the deep vulnerability inherent in proxy conflicts, right?
100%.
A superpower, like the U.S., can just decide to pause hostilities based on its own domestic political calculus, leaving regional allies feeling completely exposed and betrayed.
Because the mechanism of a proxy war means you rarely control the brakes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But while the political fallout in the Middle East is incredibly severe, the economic ripple effects globally, and particularly for you listening right now in India, has been instantaneous and largely positive.
Oh, absolutely.
Which brings us right to our wallets. The Indian markets absolutely surged on this news. The Nifty 50 jumped 3.78% to hit 23,997.
That is massive.
It's its strongest single-day gain in 11 months. The Sensex climbed 3.95% to 77,562, which is its best session in 5 full years.
Just incredible numbers.
And the mechanism driving this massive influx of capital is incredibly simple, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Crude oil plunged 14% down to $94 a barrel.
Yeah, that $94 figure is the absolute magic number. You have to look at how the global oil market functions.
Right.
Prior to the ceasefire, fears of a regional escalation in the Middle East meant that a massive risk premium was being baked into every single barrel of oil pulled from the ground.
Because everyone was panicking about supply chains.
Exactly. Traders were pricing in the possibility of disruptions, like the Strait of Hormuz being blocked. But when Vance, Kushner, and Witkoff announced they were landing in Islamabad, that risk premium vanished overnight.
And the price corrects by 14%.
Yes. And for a country like India, which imports the vast majority of its crude oil, that price drop is an immediate systemic relief.
And we're seeing that relief fundamentally alter the math for major corporations across the board. I mean, all 16 major sectoral indices advanced.
Right.
You have Larsen and Toubro jumping 7.6%, largely because of their heavy exposure to infrastructure projects in the Middle East. Peace means their contracts are secure.
Makes sense.
And you have Interglobe Aviation, the parent company of Indigo, climbing 8.1% because cheaper crude oil directly translates to cheaper aviation turbine fuel.
Which is their single biggest operating expense.
Exactly. Even the Reserve Bank of India, under Governor Sanjay Malhotra, held interest rates steady. They're maintaining a balanced stance on growth and inflation, probably breathing a massive sigh of relief that they don't have to battle an imported inflation spike right now.
Oh, they are definitely relieved. When oil drops to $94, it dictates the cost of the fuel for the flight you might take next week, and it dictates the transportation costs for the vegetables sitting in your local market.
It's huge.
It is essentially the invisible current driving the entire macroeconomic picture.
But here's where I really have to push back on this market euphoria, right? Is this market surge just a coiled spring releasing?
What do you mean?
Well, are investors completely ignoring the fact that a 2-week pause is just a tiny Band-Aid on a massive geopolitical earthquake? We're celebrating a 14% drop today.
Yeah.
But the fundamental fragility of relying on the Middle East for our energy hasn't changed one bit.
That's a very fair point.
If the talks in Islamabad fail on Saturday, we are right back at $110 a barrel on Monday morning.
It is far more complex than just a coiled spring, yeah. It is a structural vulnerability that the market is just, well, choosing to temporarily ignore.
Just looking the other way.
Right. Analysts are definitely warning that this is purely a relief rally. It reduces short-term anxiety, absolutely. But you are entirely correct to question the sustainability.
Because 2 weeks is nothing.
Exactly. The economic recovery depends entirely on the mechanics of these peace negotiations. A 2-week ceasefire does not dismantle uranium enrichment facilities, and it doesn't resolve decades of proxy warfare. It is a Band-Aid over a fault line.
And that reality perfectly sets up our next source. Because while dropping oil prices to $94 is fantastic for this week's stock portfolio, true, generational security comes from not needing to care about the price of crude oil at all.
Absolutely.
And that leads us away from the Middle East and toward a massive, almost sci-fi level technological breakthrough on the coast of Tamil Nadu.
Yes, the developments at the Kalpakkam prototype fast breeder reactor, or the PFBR. This is a monumental day for Indian science and energy independence.
It really is.
The reactor has officially achieved what is called criticality, and the international response has been swift and highly validating.
Yeah, I saw the IAEA weighed in.
Right. Rafael Mariano Grossi, the chief of the International Atomic Energy Agency, personally congratulated Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He praised this as an impressive milestone for fuel sustainability and the future of global nuclear energy.
Okay, we really need to break down the mechanics of this, because words like criticality and fast breeder sound like they belong in an advanced physics textbook. We need to make this real for you listening.
Sure, let's break it down.
What exactly just happened inside that facility in Kalpakkam?
Let's start with the concept of criticality, because it often sounds alarming to the general public. You hear critical and you think danger.
Yeah, you picture alarms flashing in a meltdown.
Exactly, but in nuclear physics, achieving criticality does not mean the reactor is in danger. It's the exact opposite.
Oh, really?
Yes. It means the nuclear chain reaction inside the reactor core has become completely self-sustaining. The neutrons being produced by the fission of the nuclear fuel are perfectly balanced with the neutrons being absorbed.
This is a good thing.
A very good thing. The reactor is now officially awake and functioning under its own stable power without needing an external neutron source to keep the reaction going.
Okay, so essentially the engine is finally turned over, it caught the spark, and now it is idling perfectly on its own.
That is a good baseline way to look at it. But it is the fast breeder aspect of this specific reactor that makes it a completely revolutionary piece of engineering.
How is it different from a normal reactor?
Well, a traditional nuclear reactor, the kind operating all over the world today, consumes nuclear fuel to create heat. That heat boils water, turns a turbine, and creates electricity.
Right.
But a fast breeder reactor is fundamentally designed to actually generate more fissile material, more fuel than it consumes while it operates.
Wait, I need to wrap my head around that. So this reactor is essentially like a magical sourdough starter.
A sourdough starter?
Yeah, like the more you use it to bake bread, the more raw material it somehow creates for the next batch. Does that track?
It is an interesting analogy, for sure. But imagine if that sourdough starter was operating at hundreds of degrees Celsius, required liquid sodium as a coolant instead of water, and took over 70 years of relentless, agonizingly precise engineering to perfect.
Okay, slightly more complicated than flour and water.
Just a bit. But yes, functionally, it is breeding its own fuel. To understand the how and the why of this, we have to look back at the 70-year history of India's grand three-stage nuclear strategy.
Which was originally envisioned by Dr. Homi Bhabha back in the 1950s, right?
Exactly.
But why did we need a three-stage strategy in the first place? Why couldn't we just build normal reactors like France or the U.S.?
Well, basically it comes down to geography, right? And geology. India does not have vast, easily accessible domestic reserves of natural uranium, which is the standard fuel used in global nuclear reactors.
No, I see.
If India relied only on uranium, it would just be trading its dependence on Middle Eastern oil for a dependence on imported uranium from countries like Australia or Canada.
So we'd still be at the mercy of global supply chains.
Exactly. But what India does have is one of the world's largest reserves of a different element, thorium.
Thorium.
Right, which is primarily found in the monazite sands along the coasts of southern states like Tamil Nadu and Kerala.
So we have an absolute abundance of the wrong kind of fuel.
Precisely. You cannot just take raw thorium, put it into a standard nuclear reactor, and get energy. Thorium is fertile, but it is not fissile.
Meaning it can't start the fire itself.
Exactly. It cannot sustain a chain reaction on its own. You have to transmute it. You have to convert it at an atomic level. And this three-stage program is the mechanism designed to bridge that gap.
Okay, walk me through the stages.
Stage 1 involved building standard reactors that use natural uranium to produce power. But as a byproduct, they create plutonium.
Okay, so stage 1 makes plutonium. Where does Kalpakkam and the fast breeder fit in?
The fast breeder reactor at Kalpakkam is the crucial second stage. It takes that plutonium from stage 1, mixes it with depleted uranium, and creates a highly energetic, fast neutron reaction.
Why fast?
Because they don't use water to slow down the neutrons, hence the term fast breeder. These high-energy neutrons not only sustain the reaction, but also interact with a blanket of fertile material placed around the core.
And what's in the blanket?
Over time, as this technology scales, that blanket will be made of India's abundant thorium. The fast neutrons will bombard the thorium-232, eventually transmuting it into uranium-233,
Which is
a highly efficient, usable nuclear fuel.
That is absolutely staggering. So we are basically building an impossibly complex machine that eats the limited fuel we produced in stage 1 to cook the abundant thorium sand we have a ton of, transmuting it into a brand new fuel.
Yes.
So that eventually, in stage 3, we are completely 100% self-reliant.
Exactly. You are mastering atomic alchemy to secure the nation's future. And if we connect this back to the geopolitical shockwave we discussed in the first segment, this is the ultimate structural antidote.
It really is.
This is how a nation genuinely insulates itself from the whims of proxy wars, from the panic of crude oil spiking over $100 a barrel, and from the complex, fragile diplomacy of U.S.-Iran ceasefires.
Because you just don't need their fuel anymore.
Right. It is about achieving long-term, unshakable energy sovereignty through clean, scalable, indigenous technology. The IAEA's recognition here validates that India has cleared one of the hardest engineering hurdles in the world.
But I have to ask about the timeline and the scalability here. I mean, we're talking about Homi Bhabha envisioning this in the 1950s.
Yeah, it's been a long road.
It's 2026, and we are just now achieving criticality on the prototype. Does this actually scale in time to replace our reliance on oil? Or is this just a brilliant science experiment that will take another 50 years to power a single city?
That is the most critical pushback for sure. The engineering challenges of liquid sodium cooling, which is highly reactive if it ever touches air or water, have caused decades of delays.
Sounds dangerous.
It requires extreme precision. Scaling a prototype into a fleet of commercial fast breeders is going to be incredibly capital-intensive and slow. It is not going to replace imported oil next week or even next decade.
Right.
But achieving criticality proves the underlying physics and the domestic engineering capability are sound. It is a generational play, not a quarterly earnings fix.
It is a fundamental generational upgrade to the country's physical and economic infrastructure. But what is truly fascinating about today's news is that while the scientists are painstakingly upgrading the energy grid for the next century, the politicians are completely fundamentally redesigning the democratic infrastructure of the country.
You're talking about the massive shift coming to the physical and demographic makeup of the Indian parliament.
Yes, and this is going to affect every single listener directly. The Union Cabinet, in a meeting chaired by Prime Minister Modi, has just approved a draft amendment bill to operationalize the Women's Reservation Act in time for the 2029 Lok Sabha elections.
And the sheer numbers here are staggering.
They really are. The plan is to expand the Lok Sabha from its current 543 seats to a massive 816 seats.
It is a complete redrawing of the political map of the largest democracy on Earth. Out of those 816 newly apportioned seats, 273, which is roughly one-third, will be reserved strictly for women.
That's a huge shift in representation.
Huge. And importantly, the mechanics of this bill include a vertical quota, meaning the reservation for women will be applied within the existing constitutional frameworks for marginalized communities.
Okay, let's pause and define that, because vertical quota is a term thrown around in policy circles. But how does it actually work mathematically for the voter?
To understand a vertical quota, you really have to look at how reservations intersect. Currently, a certain percentage of seats in the Lok Sabha are reserved for scheduled castes, or SC, and scheduled tribes, ST.
Right.
A vertical quota means that the 33% reservation for women doesn't just sit alongside these existing categories, it cuts through them vertically.
Okay, give me an example.
So if a state has, say, 15 seats reserved for scheduled caste candidates, 33% of those specific 15 seats, so 5 seats, must be reserved specifically for women from the scheduled caste community.
Ah,
It ensures that the increase in female representation is intersectional and doesn't just benefit women from historically privileged or dominant demographics.
That makes perfect sense. It builds the gender reservation directly into the existing architecture of representation.
Yeah.
But the timeline of this rollout is what really caught my eye.
The speed of it.
Exactly. The original Women's Reservation Act, which was passed with so much fanfare in 2023, was explicitly tied to a future census and a subsequent delimitation exercise. Most political analysts assumed that meant it wouldn't actually be implemented until the 2030s. So how is the cabinet fast-tracking this for 2029?
Well, they have found a strategic and highly consequential legal loophole.
Loophole.
Yes. The mechanism required to add these seats is called delimitation, which is the complex process of redrawing constituency boundaries based on the latest population data.
Just to make sure every politician represents roughly the same number of voters.
Right. The government plans to conduct this massive delimitation exercise using the demographic data from the 2011 census rather than waiting for the delayed 2021 census data or the next scheduled cycle in 2027.
Wait, they're using data from 2011?
Yes. By relying on the older, already finalized 2011 data, they completely bypass the current bureaucratic delays in census collection and can force this rollout in time for the 2029 general elections.
But adding over 270 new politicians to the lower house is mind-boggling. Think about how this changes your power as a voter. It isn't just about ordering extra chairs for the new parliament building. It shifts the entire center of gravity of Indian politics.
It changes everything.
Does this risk diluting the power of existing regional strongholds? Or is it the ultimate democratization? I mean, if you suddenly have 273 new constituencies carved out across the country, the political map of every single state changes overnight.
It is both a massive democratization and a profound disruption of regional power. To understand why this is so sensitive, you really have to look at the history of delimitation.
Which goes back to the 70s, right?
Yes. In 1976, during the emergency, the government actually froze the number of Lok Sabha seats.
Why did they freeze it?
Because southern states had been highly successful at implementing family planning and controlling their population growth. If seats were reapportioned purely based on population every 10 years, the southern states would lose political power simply because they governed effectively.
While northern states, with exploding populations, would gain massive influence.
Exactly. That freeze was extended again in 2001, pushing the issue to 2026.
So using the 2011 census data is a calculated compromise.
Exactly. Using the 2011 data might mitigate some of that immediate anxiety for southern states compared to using a hypothetical 2024 population count, because the demographic disparity wasn't quite as extreme back in 2011.
That's a clever workaround.
It is. However, the sheer logistical and administrative reality of managing 816 constituencies is going to reshape electoral strategies entirely. The bill is set for debate during the expanded budget session from April 16th to 18th, and it is going to be a historic, highly contentious discussion about what representation actually looks like.
It is the architecture of democracy being cleanly debated in air-conditioned cabinet rooms. But as we know, the actual practice of democracy is a lot less sterile and a lot more visceral.
Very true.
While the cabinet is drawing up the mathematical map for 2029, the raw, chaotic, and often bitter reality of today's politics is playing out on the ground right now in the 2026 state elections.
Today is a major polling day. We have over 5.3 crore voters heading to the polling booths across Assam, Kerala, and Puducherry.
And the stakes in each of these regions are incredibly high, with completely different political landscapes and historical baggage. Just to set the scene for you listening in Assam, it is a 126-member assembly. You have the 2.5 crore voters.
And it's largely a bipolar fight there.
Exactly. The ruling BJP-led NDA and the Chief Minister Himanta Biswa Sarma is pushing for a third consecutive term. They are heavily campaigning on their record of welfare schemes and infrastructure governance.
And on the other side?
You have the Congress-led opposition, spearheaded by Gaurav Gogoi, fighting desperately for a revival after a decade out of power, trying to capitalize on localized economic anxieties.
Meanwhile, down south in Kerala, all 140 constituencies are voting in a single phase today. The electorate there is 2.71 crore. Now, the mechanism of Kerala politics is historically defined by a rigid pendulum.
The famous Kerala pendulum.
Right. For 4 decades, the state has reliably flipped back and forth between the Left Democratic Front, or LDF, and the Congress-led United Democratic Front, the UDF. Anti-incumbency isn't just a trend there, it's practically an electoral law.
But the LDF is trying to break that law this time.
Exactly. The ruling LDF under Chief Minister Pinarayi Vijayan is trying to secure an unprecedented third consecutive term, which would completely shatter that historical pendulum.
And the UDF.
The UDS is banking heavily on that traditional anti-incumbency sentiment finally catching up with the government. And injecting massive volatility into this bipolar system is the BJP-led NDA, which is aggressively trying to convert their slowly rising vote share into actual tangible seats in the assembly.
Effectively trying to force a true tripolar contest.
Precisely.
And then you have the Union Territory of Puducherry, with its 30 assembly seats and about 9.5 lakh voters. The NDA is trying to retain power there against the Congress DMK India bloc. But the absolute wild card in Puducherry is the entry of a brand new political outfit launched by the incredibly popular actor Vijay.
That is going to be fascinating to watch.
It is. It's adding a highly disruptive, unpredictable, populist element to what is already a multi-cornered contest.
The pure logistics of facilitating this, coordinating millions of voters across thousands of polling stations, implementing vulnerable booth mapping to prevent violence, deploying drones for surveillance, and managing heavy central security forces. It's a monumental civic exercise.
It really is.
But as you mentioned, the friction of democracy isn't just happening at the polling booth today. It's happening in the institutional clashes behind the scenes.
Friction is putting it very mildly.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the absolute explosion that happened in New Delhi yesterday between the Election Commission of India and the Trinamool Congress.
Yeah, that was intense.
A TMC delegation, which included high-profile figures like Derek O'Brien and Sagrika Ghose, went to meet the full bench of the Election Commission regarding the upcoming phases of the West Bengal elections. And the meeting completely derailed.
The core of the dispute here revolves around the mechanics of the special intensive revision of West Bengal's electoral rolls.
What does that mean exactly?
Well, maintaining a clean voter list is a massive bureaucratic undertaking. The Election Commission routinely purges names of voters who have died, moved away, or are duplicated.
It sounds standard.
It is, but the TMC is alleging that during this specific revision, 27 lakh names were removed. That brings the state's total eligible voter count down drastically from 7.66 crore to 7.04 crore.
That's a massive drop.
Right. The TMC is formally accusing the commission of acting favorably toward the opposition BJP by intentionally utilizing these mass dilutions to disenfranchise TMC supporters.
And the meeting itself sounds less like a bureaucratic procedure and more like a tense movie scene. According to the TMC's version of events, Derek O'Brien claims that when they raised these severe issues and submitted official letters from Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee, Chief Election Commissioner Ganesh Kumar literally told the delegation to get lost.
Get lost. Wow.
Yeah. O'Brien even stated to the press that as they walked out of the room, a TMC colleague sarcastically congratulated the CEC for being the only official to have removal notices moved against him in both houses of parliament.
Okay, but the Election Commission's version of events paints a starkly different picture of the mechanics of that meeting.
What's their side?
Sources within the commission countered that the TMC delegation was aggressively shouting and completely lacking basic professional decorum.
So they deny the get lost comment.
They claim the CEC simply asked O'Brien to maintain decorum after he raised his voice, asserting that such confrontational behavior was entirely inappropriate for a formal meeting with the constitutional body.
It's a he said, she said situation.
Exactly. This clash perfectly highlights the intense pressure, the high stakes, and the profound distrust that currently exists between political parties and the regulatory bodies tasked with refereeing the democratic process as we head toward the crucial Bengal polling phases later this month.
And the drama is certainly not confined to closed-door meetings in Delhi. We have Congress leader Pawan Khera releasing a video message from an undisclosed location, publicly claiming he's actively having to avoid the Assam police in the middle of a major election.
The timeline of this specific confrontation is important to understand. On April 7th, an Assam police team conducted a search at Khera's residence in Nizamuddin, Delhi.
Okay, why were they searching his house?
This police action was triggered by a formal criminal complaint filed by Raniki Bhuyan Sharma, who is the wife of Assam Chief Minister Himanta Biswa Sarma. She accused the Congress Party, and Khera specifically, of using forged documents to maliciously target her reputation.
Right, because Khera has been raising these highly specific, intense allegations regarding purported foreign investments made by the chief minister's wife.
Yes.
In his video, Kara specifically detailed a Wyoming-based company allegedly linked to her, citing addresses connected to London, Dubai, and Dhaka, along with claims about multiple foreign passports and a UAE golden visa.
He's throwing a lot out there.
He is. Kara says he is not afraid of the investigation, but he is temporarily avoiding the police because he has more questions to ask the public, and he directly accuses the chief minister of using the state police apparatus purely as an intimidation tactic against political opponents.
In response, the chief minister, Himanta Biswa Sarma, took to social media to categorically call the entire episode an outright deception.
He's denying all of it.
Firmly. He stated that the documents Kara is circulating are completely fabricated and have already been thoroughly debunked by his legal team. Meanwhile, on the campaign trail, Rahul Gandhi has amplified this exact attack.
Right, he called Sarma the most corrupt chief minister.
Yes, and simultaneously rolling out massive counter-promises to the electorate, including a pledge for a 25 lakh rupee health insurance scheme per family and a promise to ensure justice for the legacy of the late singer Zubin Gargar.
It is absolute bare-knuckle politics out there. And what is fascinating is that even within parties that are supposed to be united, the friction is palpable. Look at the Aam Aadmi Party.
The AAP situation is really interesting.
Sidelined AAP MP Raghav Chadha is dropping massive public hints about a potential rebellion. He was recently removed from his position as the party's deputy leader in the Rajya Sabha.
Why was he removed?
AAP leadership accused him of doing soft PR instead of aggressively raising Punjab's issues and of hesitating to properly question the central government. Chadha countered that he prefers to raise substantive people's issues rather than just causing theatrical disruptions in the House.
But it's his recent social media activity that's truly fueling the speculation about the internal mechanics of the party, right?
Exactly. He shared a video of a content creator openly suggesting that Chadha should launch his own independent political party rather than playing second fiddle in an existing one.
And he responded to that.
He replied with a very public, interesting thought. Furthermore, he posted a picture highlighting a specific book chapter titled Never Outshine the Master,
which is a direct quote from Robert Greene's incredibly famous book, The 48 Laws of Power.
Right. It does not take a seasoned political analyst to read that as a thinly veiled, highly pointed shot at AAP convener Arvind Kejriwal.
No, it's pretty clear.
It is fascinating to step back and look at this entire section. We go from the sterile, mathematical redesign of the parliament in the previous segment, talking calmly about delimitation and vertical quotas, straight into the absolute mud of human behavior.
It's a stark contrast.
Police raids, shouting matches at the election commission, cryptic Instagram posts quoting Machiavellian literature. It is the sheer, undeniable, chaotic human friction of democracy in action.
It is a messy, deeply human process driven by ego, ideology, and a raw pursuit of power. But while the politicians are fiercely bickering over voter lists, historical pendulums, and internal party dynamics, the Supreme Court is currently wrestling with a conflict that transcends electoral politics entirely.
A completely different kind of battle.
Yes, they are debating the very boundaries of human belief in constitutional logic.
Yes, and this is where our deep dive takes a profoundly philosophical turn. And I want you, the listener, to really think about how this affects the way your own traditions interact with the law. We are looking at the ongoing hearings by a massive 9-judge Supreme Court bench led by Chief Justice Surya Kant.
This is a huge case.
It is. They are tasked with reviewing the landmark 2018 Sabarimala judgment, which originally struck down centuries of tradition to uphold the right of women of menstruating age to enter the Sabarimala shrine in Kerala.
The arguments being presented before this 9-judge bench go to the absolute core of how a modern, secular constitutional state interacts with ancient religious traditions.
How so?
Well, Solicitor General Tushar Mehta, representing the union government, is arguing a fascinating and highly nuanced point. He asserts that true religious reform must emerge organically from within the religion itself.
Rather than from the outside.
Exactly, and that secular courts cannot and should not act as theological censors?
He specifically argued that beliefs which do not violate public order, public morality, or health cannot be subjected to judicial review based purely on modern rationality or scientific logic.
Right.
And the bench seems to be deeply wrestling with this exact tension. Justice B.V. Nagaratna stated that a religion cannot completely lose its identity in the name of social reform. If you strip away every illogical ritual, is it still a religion?
It's a profound question.
And Justice M.M. Sundresh made an incredibly blunt observation regarding the mechanics of faith. He noted that logic, fundamentally, cannot be applied to religion.
That is the crux of the entire legal debate. To understand the mechanics of this, you have to look at the legal history. Mitha cited arguments from the legendary lawyer Nani Palkavala during the 1972 Seshamol judgment,
What was the argument there?
emphasizing that the state cannot reform a religion out of existence. For decades, Indian courts have relied on something called the Essential Religious Practices Test, which actually originated in the 1954 Shirur Mutt case, to decide what the Constitution protects.
How does that test work?
If a ritual is essential to the faith, it is protected. If it is merely a secular or peripheral addition, the state can regulate it.
But the government is now arguing against that exact test, right?
Exactly. Mitha argued that the court's previous reliance on defining essential religious practices is fundamentally flawed when applied to a faith like Hinduism.
Why is it flawed?
Because Hinduism is a vast plurality of beliefs, local customs, and hyper-specific traditions that cannot be neatly categorized by a secular judge into core practices versus superstitious additions.
Well, that makes sense.
Chief Justice Kant even pointed out a textual reality. The word essential does not actually appear anywhere in Article 25 of the Constitution regarding the freedom of religion.
I have to ask about this boundary line, though. If the court says that logic is not the right lens for faith, isn't applying the secular constitution to ancient mystical rituals a bit like trying to run a legacy software program on a brand new operating system?
That's a good way to phrase it.
The source code of ancient faith simply doesn't recognize the inputs of a modern democratic constitution. But on the flip side, where does a democracy draw the line?
That's a danger, right?
What if that legacy software is running the life support system for millions of people's identities and rights? If a religious practice fundamentally violates a modern citizen's right to equality, can the state really just step back and say, well, it's illogical, so we can't touch it?
That is the exact razor-sharp friction point that Justice Jaimalya Bagchi raised during the hearing. He pushed back hard, asking a hypothetical question to test the limits of Mehta's argument.
What was the hypothetical?
He asked, could practices like witchcraft or human sacrifice or untouchability be protected if someone simply claimed they were deeply held religious beliefs?
That's the extreme end of the spectrum. And how did the Solicitor General respond to that extreme hypothetical?
His response was to retreat back to the explicit text of the Constitution. He argued that state intervention is strictly allowed, but only on the specific constitutional grounds of public order, morality, or health.
Not simply because a modern judge decides a practice is an illogical superstition.
Exactly. And that led to a fascinating, highly semantic debate over the definition of the word morality.
Right. Because whose morality are we even talking about?
Precisely. The Solicitor General criticized the original 2018 Sabarimala verdict for replacing the concept of public morality with the concept of constitutional morality.
Okay, what's the distinction there?
He argued that constitutional morality is a standard meant to be applied to public functionaries, like politicians passing laws or bureaucrats executing policy, but it should never be used as a blunt yardstick to review and invalidate ancient religious practices.
Interesting.
But then Justice Nagaratna pushed back on that, noting the reality that public morality evolves over time.
Right.
What was considered perfectly moral by the public a century ago is not necessarily considered moral by the public today.
And Justice Bagchi added the vital democratic principle that the secular and religious spheres simply cannot be merged. The center even brought up the famous Bijo Emanuel judgment, the Jehovah's Witnesses national anthem case, to argue that a judge's personal, logical view of whether a practice makes sense is completely irrelevant.
Exactly. The only legal test is whether the religious belief is genuinely and devoutly held by the practitioner.
It is a profound, incredibly dense legal and theological knot that this 9-judge bench is trying to untangle. And the reality is some of these deep conflicts between ancient tradition and modern constitutional rights take decades, if not centuries, to truly resolve.
It requires a level of nuance and patience that is increasingly rare today. The Supreme Court is trying to find a mechanism to allow faith and the Constitution to coexist without one destroying the other.
Which is heavy. It is incredibly heavy to think about, especially when you consider how it might eventually impact the traditions you grew up with.
Yeah, it hits close to home for a lot of people.
But thankfully, amidst all this slow-moving generational conflict, whether it is the decades required to build a fast breeder reactor, the years it takes to redraw parliament, or the centuries it takes to resolve theological law, there is one arena in human life where conflicts are resolved definitively, mathematically, and in exactly 20 overs.
We absolutely have to talk about the IPL.
We do. Because if you want the perfect psychological distraction from geopolitics and Supreme Court jurisprudence, you just look at what happened in Delhi last night between the Gujarat Titans and the Delhi Capitals.
It was an absolute heartstopper.
The Titans clinched a one-run victory on the final ball of the match.
A 1-1 victory when you were defending a massive total of 211. The margin for error over the course of those 120 deliveries is essentially zero.
Let's paint the picture of this climax for you listening, because the psychology of this final over is just as fascinating as the athletics. Delhi Capitals are chasing 211. KL Rahul had played a masterful anchoring innings, scoring 92 off 52 balls to drag them back from the brink.
Because they were really struggling earlier.
Right, because Gujarat's Rashid Khan had earlier ripped entirely through their middle order, taking out key players like Nitish Rana, Samir Rizvi, and Axar Patel. So after all that momentum shifting back and forth, it all comes down to the final over. The Gujarat Titans hand the ball to fast bowler Prasidh Krishna.
And you have to understand the specific mechanical pressure Prasidh Krishna is operating under here. Not just because he had been expensive earlier in the match and his confidence might be shaken, but because of a crucial, newly enforced rule in the IPL, the slow overrate penalty.
Break down how that penalty actually changes the geometry of the game for the bowler.
The rule is designed to force teams to bowl their overs within a strict time limit to speed up the broadcast. Due to the Titans taking too long to bowl their previous overs, they were penalized at the most critical moment possible.
What was the penalty?
For that final over, the umpire informed them they were allowed only 4 fielders outside the 30-yard restriction circle instead of the usual 5.
So Krishna is suddenly robbed of a boundary rider.
Exactly. The boundary is heavily exposed. As a fast bowler, your entire mental map of where you can safely force the batsman to hit the ball has to instantly change. It is a massive psychological disadvantage.
Fast forward to the final 2 deliveries of the match. The tension is unbearable. Delhi needs exactly 2 runs off 2 balls. David Miller's on strike.
And he's already injured.
Yes, he's battling a bruised finger. He had actually retired hurt earlier in the innings, but he has bravely come back out to finish the job. Prasidh Krishna bowls the second-to-last ball. Miller hits it, and it goes into a gap. He could easily jog a single, tie the game, and guarantee a super over.
But he doesn't.
He actively refuses to take the run. He puts his hand up and sends the non-striker back to his crease.
That decision, the sheer audacity of it is breathtaking.
The hubris.
Yeah.
The absolute towering confidence to look at the scoreboard, know you need 2 runs, and say to your partner, no, I am not tying this game and letting someone else face the pressure of the last ball. I am going to finish this right here, right now, myself.
But that is the ultimate double-edged sword of elite sports psychology, isn't it?
So?
If he hits a boundary on that final ball, he is a legend. He is the ice-cold, calculating finisher who backed his own ability when it mattered most. But Prasidh Krishna, bowling with a penalized field, held his nerve brilliantly.
He really did.
He didn't bowl a predictable Yorker. He delivered a perfectly disguised slower bouncer on the final delivery. The biomechanics of the delivery were entirely deceptive. Miller, having bet everything on his ability to make clean contact, swings aggressively and misses the ball entirely.
And pure chaos erupts. The ball goes through to the keeper. Miller and Kuldeep Yadav desperately try to scramble for a bye just to tie the match.
It was madness.
But Joss Butler, anticipating the scramble, executes a razor-sharp underarm direct hit at the stumps, running out Kuldeep Yadav. The bails light up. The Gujarat Titans win by 1 single run. The heartbreak for Miller, sitting there realizing his gamble failed, must be absolutely immense.
And that heartbreak perfectly illustrates why sports captivate us so completely, especially when contrasted with the rest of the news today.
That's a great point.
In the previous sections, we discussed the Middle East, the Supreme Court, the chaotic state elections. In all of those real-world arenas, closure is an absolute illusion.
It's just an ongoing cycle.
A ceasefire is just a temporary 2-week pause in a decades-long proxy war. A state election simply leads to another term of difficult compromises and political bickering. A Supreme Court ruling often just spawns decades of brand new, highly complex litigation.
Right.
But in sports, when those LED bails are dislodged on the final ball, the narrative is complete. The math is absolute. It provides a definitive, immediate resolution that the real world almost never offers.
That's such a compelling way to frame it. The scoreboard is the only place in modern life where the math is truly undeniably final.
Exactly.
Okay, let's take a deep breath and look back at the incredible scope of what we've unpacked together in this deep dive.
We've covered a lot.
We really have. We started with the rapid whiplash of global geopolitics, a sudden, unexpected U.S.-Iran ceasefire brokered in Pakistan that instantly sent global crude oil plummeting to $94 and the Indian stock market surging by thousands of points.
And then we looked at how India is attempting to permanently escape that exact geopolitical vulnerability by mastering atomic alchemy.
Right, achieving criticality with a revolutionary fast breeder nuclear reactor in Kalpakkam that literally breeds its own fuel from coastal sand.
We then explored the physical manifestation of political change, detailing how the Union Cabinet is utilizing a 2011 census loophole to fundamentally expand the parliament to 816 seats.
Altering the demographic power balance to make room for a massive wave of female representation.
Yeah, and we contrasted that sterile mathematical planning with the raw, aggressive reality of the ongoing state elections across Assam, Kerala, and Puducherry.
Complete with allegations of mass voter deletions, police raids over foreign investments, and cryptic Machiavellian social media rebellions within the AAP.
And we rounded it out with the profound philosophical debate at the Supreme Court, wrestling with whether the rigid secular logic of the Constitution can even be applied to the ancient, deeply held faiths of Sabrimala.
Before finally finding our only moment of pure, mathematically satisfying closure in a thrilling one-run IPL climax.
It is a profound, highly detailed snapshot of a society in rapid motion. And as we wrap up, it leaves us with a lingering, almost uncomfortable question for you to ponder.
What's the question?
As our society hurtles toward a hyper-rational, technologically advanced future, a future where we are engineering liquid sodium fast breeder nuclear reactors that create their own fuel, and where we are using complex census data to algorithmically redraw the democratic balance of power for hundreds of millions of people, will our rigid, modern legal frameworks increasingly struggle to coexist with the deeply held, often illogical and ancient faiths that still define so much of the human experience?
That is the ultimate tension of the modern age. We are brilliantly building the infrastructure of the future, but we are still fiercely trying to figure out how it fits with the traditions of our past. It is exactly like we said at the start. The map is shifting under our feet, and the concrete is still very wet.
Perfectly said.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the foundations, keep looking for the underlying mechanisms connecting the news, and keep exploring the fascinating world around you. We'll catch you on the next one.